If you clicked to hear the real story behind Satoshi Nakamoto, this guy right here, who launched and created Bitcoin, guys, this is the episode that you've been waiting for. Because to understand who controls the future of money, you have to start with the one line that shaped centuries of power. Permit me to issue and control the money of a nation, and I care not who makes its laws. This line has always sent shivers down my spine. That quote, the Rothschilds' doctrine, has echoed through every regime shift since the 1700s. And if you think the money masters were caught off guard by Bitcoin, think again. For centuries, the world's most powerful families and institutions have built empires, not by writing the rules, but by writing the ledger. From the Rothschilds to the Morgans to the faceless architects of the Fed. One truth always wins. Whoever controls the money controls the world. But every empire crumbles. And if you were in control of the money itself and you saw the end coming, if you had unlimited resources, intelligence, and time, how would you prepare? I spent a decade watching Bitcoin change the world. And I'll be honest, part of me wants to believe the legend. A lone coder, a digital Robin Hood, gifting humanity the keys of freedom. But what if the story is a masterpiece of misdirection? What if Bitcoin is the greatest chess move ever played by the same hidden hands that controlled every regime before? So today, guys, I'm pulling back the curtain. We'll follow the evidence, decode the myth, and reveal why, if I'm right, the future of money is even more bullish than you ever imagined. Now, this theory, it might sound insane at first, and maybe it is. I'm only about 50% convinced myself. The other half of me is still rooting for the benevolent Satoshi superhero that we all hoped he would be. The silent hero who walked away so the world could be free and sacrificing his eternal wealth for the betterment of others. But by the end of this episode, the real debate won't be about Satoshi's identity. It'll be about who's holding the power as the next chapter of money gets written right in front of us, right now. The game isn't over. In fact, for those paying attention, it's just getting started. Let's get something straight. History's greatest money shifts have never been left to chance. Every regime change, the move from gold to pound sterling, from the pound to the US dollar, from the gold-backed dollar to pure filthy fiat. It all happened in the shadows of those who control the money supply. And every single time, the story was dressed up as progress, reform, or the will of the people. But behind the scenes, it's always the same dynasties. The House of Rothschilds, the Morgans, the Warburgs, the Rockefellers. Sound familiar? They're engineering the next order before the collapse of the old one. The receipts are all there. Meeting minutes, archive memos, and the relentless consolidation of power after every crisis. Let me take you guys all back to 1910, where it all started on Jekyll Island, when the world's most powerful bankers, Warburg, Aldrich, Vanderlip, snuck away under fake names to design what would become the Federal Reserve. But these weren't just isolated titans. Paul Warburg came straight from Kuhn, Loeb & Co., a firm with deep European banking roots. Its partnerships and even marriages tying back to the Rothschilds themselves. Frank Vanderlip was the president of National City Bank, the future Citibank, whose war chests were loaded with Rockefeller oil money. So when these men drew up the new blueprint for America's money, they were all doing it on behalf of the dynasties that had already mastered the art of empire finance. The goal? Build a system that centralizes the power to create and control money no matter which party or president sits in office. That secret meeting set the playbook for every regime change since. Those same elite families have influenced the outcome of world events ever since, quietly funding campaigns, donating to think tanks, and placing trusted operatives in key advisory roles. The Rothschilds and Rockefellers didn't need to sit in Congress. They just needed the ear of those who did. Over decades, their financial tentacles wrapped around both sides of the political aisle, fueling legislation that protected their interests, crushed their competitors, and deepened their control over the flow of global capital. Think about Bretton Woods in 1944. World War II was barely over, but behind the closed doors, 44 nations gathered in New Hampshire to redesign the entire global financial system. The US emerged as the dominant force, its economy untouched by war, its gold reserves unmatched. And from that moment, the dollar wasn't just a currency, it became the backbone of world trade, debt, and reserves. It wasn't crowned king because it was the fairest system. It won because the people pulling the strings knew they could enforce it militarily, economically, and diplomatically. But nothing lasts forever. The gold standard collapsed in the 70s. Suddenly, money was just paper backed by promises and the military. And the promises started to wobble. Inflation, debt, and geopolitical rivalries grew. But if you were in that boardroom, if you were the Rothschilds, the Fed, the City of London, the true owners of the system, you'd see the cracks decades before anyone else. Paul Warburg, one of the original architects of the Fed, was openly talking about international control of currency as early as 1910. That vision never left the stage. It just changed costumes every generation. And get this, IMF archives show that as early as 1972, global bankers were already modeling future international money systems that included apolitical digital units for world trade. Money that wouldn't be controlled or owned by any one country. They saw the endgame decades before Bitcoin was ever even created. And if you had unlimited resources, intelligence networks, and generations of experience, you wouldn't wait until the house was burning. You'd be planning your next move the moment you smelt smoke. Because for the true money masters, control isn't about fighting for power after the collapse. It's about engineering the next regime before the old one dies. So you're never left on the outside looking in. So what do? You quietly start designing a new system. One that looks nothing like the old world, but lets you keep the keys to the vault. And right on cue, as the world's faith in banks and governments was imploding after the 2008 crash, something miraculous happened. A 9-page white paper signed by a ghost, promising salvation through mathematics. When you pull back the curtain, the release of Bitcoin white paper feels less like a random act of digital rebellion and more like a perfectly timed, controlled demolition of trust and fiat, redirecting the world's needs for a new anchor right into the system that elites could eventually co-opt. But let's be real. You can't just unveil a new world currency and expect the world to cheer. There's too much going on, especially not in the 21st century when every government, every nuclear power, every billionaire, and every coder is ready to call BS on the old system. So what's the move? You build a legend. If you're really the group that's controlled money for generations, you don't launch your new system in broad daylight with your fingerprints all over the code. You make it look like fate. You let it come out of nowhere from the digital shadows. No corporation, no government, no familiar name and family attached to it, just a white paper signed by a ghost. It's the ultimate narrative trick. You stage resistance from all the right players. Public dismissals. It'll never work from Wall Street. Rat poison squared from the greatest investors in the world. Scare stories about criminals and hackers from governments and regulators. You let the media call it a scam. Heck, you call it a scam. A toy for nerds. A threat to the world order. You let the world believe money masters are losing control. All the while, you're quietly guiding it from the sidelines, testing, tweaking, and making sure it can survive attack after attack, FUD after FUD. Let's not forget, the NSA literally invented SHA-256, the cryptographic heart of Bitcoin, but it goes deeper. Back in 1996, the NSA filed a patent for a cryptographic currency 12 years before the Bitcoin white paper even appeared. The groundwork was already laid in official US government filings. Coincidence or just another mask? And while the world focused on Satoshi and the cypherpunks, The real power brokers were already planning their next act. The Bank for International Settlements, central bank to the central banks, were quietly publishing research on central bank digital currencies as far back as the late 1990s. The playbook was in motion long before anyone on Reddit was talking about sound money. The cypherpunk movement, the mailing list, the cast of cryptographers and privacy activists, they provided the perfect cover. Satoshi Nakamoto becomes a digital myth, the immaculate conception for new money. No pre-mine, no early VC allocation, no backroom deals, just fair, open mining. And here's where the theatrics come in. Every time Bitcoin took a punch, the same story played out. Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan called Bitcoin a fraud in 2017. But give it 2 years, and suddenly they're launching their own digital coin. Then quietly flipping to offer Bitcoin custody and services the moment that there's money to be made. And remember, the Morgans are part of the OGs here, the money masters. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley mocked Bitcoin as a bubble, but then they rushed to open Bitcoin trading desks the moment the rails were built. It's always the same. First they ridicule, they resist, and finally, quiet acceptance, and then loud. After the money masters are sure they got their hands on the controls. And here's the wildest part. Every time you allow Bitcoin to face resistance, every time you let it nearly die, you make it stronger. You want adoption to look hard-won. You want it to feel organic, grassroots, inevitable. Because by the time the world realizes what happened, it's too late. The new regime is already in place and everyone's desperate to be part of it. That's how you manufacture a revolution, one that looks like the old powers lost, but was actually built to keep them at the top, just with a brand new mask. But here's the chessboard nobody likes to talk about. It's not 1944 anymore. You can't just roll tanks across Europe, call a meeting with Bretton Woods, and force the world to take your money. Today, every superpower, well, they got nukes. China, Russia, India, Europe, they're too big, they're too armed, and too tired of the dollar dominance to accept another American century. No amount of deals, no amount of pressure, no amount of petrodollars is going to make the world trust a single nation's currency forever. This is why the dollar can't keep going on. This is why BRICS will never be the dominant force. And if you doubt the money master's plan for this moment, just look at the policy memos. Since the late 90s, the Bank for International Settlements, the IMF, and the World Economic Forum have quietly been exploring digital neutral units of account, a new system for a world too divided for any single currency. In 2015, the IMF published Virtual Currencies and Beyond, openly discussing the possibility of reserve assets that were apolitical and digital. That's the playbook. Hide the real plan in plain sight, years before the world catches up. So if you're the true money masters, what's the play, guys? You need something the world can't accuse you of rigging, something neutral, a system nobody can point a finger at, a code base with no flag, no army, no home. That's where Bitcoin is absolutely genius, whether by accident or design. It isn't Russian, it's not American, Chinese, or European. It's everywhere and nowhere, open to all, controlled by none. You look at it like a tech experiment. Let it take a punch after punch. You let nations fight it, try to ban it. You call it criminal money. But the harder they fight, the more legitimate it looks. And while governments posture, while the media debates, you're seeding the idea in the background. Maybe the world does need a new money, one that isn't tied to Washington, Moscow, or Beijing. It's a solution hiding in plain sight. And the evidence, well, keeps piling up. By the early 2000s, the IMF and the BIS were mapping out digital reserve solutions in working groups. Proposals for a synthetic currency, special drawing rights 2.0, and multilateral digital units. Central banks started quietly funding research and pilot programs, laying the rails for a world where the next monetary order wouldn't be national, it would be digital and owned by no one. And as the cracks in the dollar system spread, debt, inflation, sanctions, weaponized finance, suddenly, world leaders are completely out of options. No one wants to trust their enemy's money. It's simple. Everyone wants a fair game. And that's when you bring Bitcoin to the table. Not as an American project, but as the world's first truly apolitical reserve asset. That's the impossible choice you designed for everyone else. Join the system or get left behind. And everyone, sooner or later, always joins the system. Let's pause for a second, because before we zoom all the way out, you can't ignore the elephant in the crypto room. Who is Satoshi Nakamoto really? For 15 years, this question has haunted forums, fueled YouTube and HBO documentaries, and sent armies of internet detectives on wild goose chases. It's the greatest Where's Waldo in finance, except the stakes are in trillions, not pocket change. And Satoshi's mystery is more than just a rabbit hole. It's a cultural touchstone, a legend that's grown with every cycle, fueling the hunt for the world's most valuable anonymous genius. Let's run through the usual suspects. You got Hal Finney, the first guy to ever run Bitcoin's code, received the first transaction, and cryptically lived just blocks from Dorian Nakamoto, the man Newsweek famously unmasked. Hal's health faded as Satoshi disappeared, fueling endless speculation that he was the heart and maybe the hands behind it all. Next up, you got Nick Szabo, the OG cryptographer whose work on BitGold was practically the blueprint for Bitcoin. His writing style, an eerily close match to Satoshi's, according to more than one AI analysis. But he's always denied it, maybe a little too strongly. Then you got Adam Back, the Hashcash inventor, referenced by Satoshi himself, and a quiet giant of the cypherpunk movement. Always in the right place, always in the right conversation, but always, he says, just a bystander. The collective theory. Some say it couldn't have been just one person. It must have been a syndicate, maybe even the NSA or the CIA. After all, the NSA literally invented the cryptographic engine at the core of Bitcoin, which is SHA-256. And for comic relief, Craig Wright, aka Fake Toshi, a man who spent more time in court than Satoshi spent posting code. The only thing the community agrees on is that it's not him. Every year, the same dance, wild theories, viral Reddit posts, a new smoking gun, and the same old outcome. No proof, no reveal, just a million untouched coins. And a myth that keeps getting stronger. But what if that's the point? What if every face, every clue, every wild goose chase was exactly what the real architects wanted us to follow? Because the true fingerprints on the vault aren't in a basement in California or a dusty server in Europe. They're etched into the meeting rooms where every regime shift in money has ever been plotted. So let's shift our gaze from mask to the masters, because maybe the Satoshi legend isn't just a person to be unmasked. Maybe it's a master plan hiding in plain sight. And if that's where the story takes its sharpest turn, because the deeper you dig, the more you realize Satoshi was never the destination. Satoshi was a perfect decoy. The real mystery is who wrote the rules behind the curtain. Now, imagine the final act. You let the old system limp along for decades, printing, borrowing, inflating, propping up a dollar that's lost its anchor and eventually its credibility. Debt soaring, lifting the debt ceiling always. 5 new trillion in debt, 40-something trillion in debt. Keep going, keep inflating and debasing. Every crisis brings more money printing. Every bailout kicks the can a little further, but sooner or later, the world wakes up. Fiat is finished. People are slowly waking up to the system that wasn't built to survive. It was built to funnel wealth upwards, to slowly erase the middle class, to lock the average person into a game they were never meant to win. We were told to save, to stash our dollars in a bank and feel proud of earning every penny's interest. While behind the curtain, those same banks were loaning our money out for massive returns. They were printing yield off cash that never belonged to them in the first place. And it worked. Decade after decade, the rich got richer, the ladder got steeper, and most people never even realized the ground was shifting under their feet. Since 1913, the US dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power. What a dollar bought back then takes nearly $30 today. After abandoning the gold standard in 1971, debt exploded. Trillions turned into tens of trillions. Today, the US national debt has surpassed $36 trillion, growing faster than GDP, tax revenue, or any hope of repayment. Meanwhile, over $1 trillion a year is spent just on interest. Inflation has hit terminal velocity. And if you look at the timeline, the pattern is always the same. 1971, the gold window closes, the world scrambles, but the money masters are already setting up the next system. 2008, the global financial system breaks. And in the background, you see not just panic, but planning. Patent filings, IMF working papers, World Bank research on digital reserve currencies suddenly surge. 2020, pandemic panic, record stimulus, and within months, the G20 and the IMF are openly floating proposals for a new digital world reserve. In every meltdown, the old guard is the first to panic, but also the first to pivot. And in the background, you'll find the meeting notes, the memos, even the cryptographic patent filings. Digital money as a safety valve, designed long before the world realized it needed one. And when that day finally comes, you don't want chaos. You don't want war, riots, or a vacuum that lets rival powers grab the steering wheel. You want order. You want to control the next chapter. So you call the summit, G20, IMF, Davos, a gathering like Bretton Woods, but for the digital age. Every finance minister, every central banker, every global heavyweight in one room arguing, bargaining, desperate for a way out from their crappy fiat currencies. The US dollar, it's done. Nobody trusts the euro, the yuan, or gold, or the BRICS. Too political, too much baggage. But there, on the table, is the one thing nobody can claim and nobody can fully control: Bitcoin. It's apolitical, it's neutral, it's transparent. It's survived every attack, every ban, every smear campaign. It's global, digital, and thanks to the myth of Satoshi, it's leaderless. And if you check the IMF and World Economic Forum's latest working papers from the last decade, you'll see digital currency proposals eerily similar to what's finally on the table, complete with the language about neutral, apolitical units of account and trustless settlement. And so there it is in the middle of the meeting. The vote is cast, not because it's idealistic, but because it's the only thing left that everyone can agree to. In that moment, the money masters have pulled off the greatest regime change in modern history, engineering a new world order where the rules look brand new, but the same hands still control the keys. And every person holding Bitcoin gets pulled into the new system by design, not by accident. That's the final move. Not a coup, not a revolution, but a perfect reset. One where the world thinks it won, and the architects never even showed their faces. But here's where the rabbit hole gets personal, because knowing this is the leverage that could decide your future. If Bitcoin ever reaches a true global reserve status, and I believe, whether you believe this is true or not, that is certainly going to happen, that so-called Satoshi stack, 1 million untouched coins, will become the most potent fortune the world has ever seen. Not just for its dollar value, but for sheer weight it could exert on global markets. Picture this: Satoshi's wallet alone sitting on more raw economic power than the reserves of most entire nations. It's a silent force that, in the right or wrong hands, could quietly move markets, dictate liquidity, and influence global policy from the shadows. And the lineage of financial power is right there in the paper trail. From the secret memos at Jekyll Island to the realignment at Bretton Woods, every regime built a fallback, an insurance policy, to keep their influence alive during the next upheaval. Fast forward to today, those tactics have gone digital. The Bank of International Settlements hosts closed-door meetings on digital assets. Look up who's buying up shares of public Bitcoin mining companies: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. The gatekeepers have never truly left the room. And the trail doesn't end there. Take Block Inc., formerly Square. Through its Bitcoin-focused division Spiral, it directly funds and employs the Bitcoin core developers working on the protocol itself. We're talking about people like Gloria Zhao, names you'll never see in mainstream headline, but who shape the very rules of how Bitcoin runs. Block Inc., guys, is a public company, and its largest institutional shareholders, well, it's BlackRock and Vanguard. The very same hands that hold the keys to the legacy system also have a seat at the table where Bitcoin's future code gets written. And if you really follow the money, it gets even more revealing. Bitcoin may be open source, but its direction is steered by a handful of developers and companies, none more influential than Blockstream. They're a powerhouse behind Bitcoin's core, shaping protocol updates like SegWit. Some say those upgrades favored off-chain scaling, think Lightning Network, making Bitcoin friendlier for banks and traditional finance, but a lot less practical for everyday people hoping to use it as true peer-to-peer cash. The same families and institutions that profited from every major banking crisis, think Rockefellers and the old money empires, they invest in disruptions they can shape. Why back Blockstream or crypto funds? Simple. To keep Bitcoin in small blocks, less scalable, and more dependent on sidechains and layered solutions they can eventually control and steer. Or, when the time is right, pivot it toward institutional adoption, ETFs, reserve asset status, you name it. Blockstream's 2016 funding came from AXA Strategic Ventures. And AXA's CEO at the time? Well, none other than Henry de Castries, chairman of the Bilderberg Group. That invitation-only summit where the world's most powerful bankers, central planners, and political dynasties meet to align their agendas in private. If Bitcoin was truly a threat to the legacy system, ask yourself, why would Bilderberg money be backing the core infrastructure? Maybe it's not about destroying fiat overnight, but keeping the system steerable, KYC layers, Lightning, and off-chain rails. They're leverage points for the next regime. So when you hear decentralized, remember, code is open, but the real power is always in who writes the rules. And if you step back, you can see the plan working in real time. Elite-backed firms are pushing protocol updates and new narratives that make Bitcoin more attractive to Wall Street and institutions. Spot ETFs, legal bank custody, and a shift from peer-to-peer electronic cash, which it was supposed to be, to a store of value for billionaires and everyone else. That's not an accident. It's a reset in plain sight. Bitcoin gets positioned as digital gold, while central bank digital currencies and stablecoins are prepped to run the everyday economy. This is great reset logic. The dollar gets inflated away. A crisis hits. Central banks roll out digital currencies for daily spending. And Bitcoin, once the outsider gets locked in as a new digital global reserve for those already in power. You're already hearing the talk about a national Bitcoin reserve. Even politicians are floating the idea. It's like deja vu from the Fed's birth. Take the revolution, put it in a new wrapper, and bring it under state control. So where are we today? Well, guys, the playbook is working. Countries are stacking sats. Banks can legally offer custody. Wall Street, they're all in. Every move brings us closer to the end game and the final regime shift. So when you do the math, Satoshi's coins could quietly tip the scales of international finance, serving as a silent back channel for settlement or as the ultimate rainy day fund for whoever ends up holding the keys. So the real question isn't just who is Satoshi, it's who stands to control that mountain of power when the dust settles. Is it really an anonymous coder? Or are we looking at a shadow network, the same stewards who have engineered each monetary order since the age of central banks? Here's what nobody wants to admit. Power rarely vanishes. It mutates, it migrates, sometimes slipping into the same circles, sometimes finding new hosts. So every time a new Satoshi theory surfaces, what we're really chasing is the trail of influence that shapes the entire system. The reality is, Bitcoin's next chapter will be written by those who recognize what's at stake and act before the new rules are set. The greatest lever in the money game is up for grabs, but only for those paying attention. So here's the final paradox. Even if Bitcoin was built as the ultimate backup plan by the very money masters who engineered every monetary shift in history, even if every twist was mapped out in advance, the revolution is real. The old playbook is dust. The genie's already out of the bottle. And this time, nobody, no government, no dynasty, no banker can put it back in. And maybe that's the wildest part of it all. If Bitcoin really was created by the cypherpunks, it's a win for freedom. But if it turns out the same architects who built every old regime also architected Bitcoin, well, guys, that is not a reason to run away. That's the biggest green light in financial history, because you'd finally know the people who never lose, the ones who always build the next system, are already all in. And for the first time, you get a seat at the table. That's what makes Bitcoin different from every other regime shift before. This time, anyone can own a piece of the new system before the ink dries on the next global chapter. For the first time in modern history, the gate has never been this open. You don't need an invite to the next Bretton Woods, just vision and a wallet address. Your name can scroll besides Rothschilds, Rockefellers, and Satoshi on the world's new digital ledger. So don't just watch history unfold, be part of it, guys. Because when the dust settles, when the votes are cast and the reserves are set, the biggest wealth transfer of our lifetime will belong to those who saw through the myth and made a move. The truth is, we may never know who Satoshi really was. Maybe that's the point, because Bitcoin was never about one person. It was about the rest of us waking up, realizing we don't need permission to opt out or opt in to the new financial system. The point of all of this is that Bitcoin, in my humble opinion, is the only choice to become the world reserve. And this is the very first year that is abundantly clear. You're not too late. You guys are early still. Bitcoin is still cheap at $120,000, $115,000. Once that meeting happens and the leaders of the world agree that Bitcoin is the one and fiat has been inflated away, Bitcoin will be an order of magnitude higher than it currently is today. How high can Bitcoin go? Well, guys, there literally is no ceiling because fiat has no floor. Bitcoin is the only way to protect yourself from poverty and to secure your financial future. So guys, let me know in the comments below, what did you think about this? Remember, I'm only 50% sure in this theory. The other 50% is the benevolent superhero. But the most important thing is to buy Bitcoin, because whether it's the benevolent superhero or the money masters who have been controlling finance forever, the end game is the same. Bitcoin will continue to skyrocket in price and become the world reserve. That I am confident in. And for who is Satoshi? Well, I think the most important thing we need to understand is that we are all Satoshi.